Hello guys and gals, and this is going to be a reading of Pandora's Jeans. It is a book by Kathryn Lance. I found this book when I was at a thrift store, and it looked awesome. The description sounded awesome, and so yeah. But as always, we're going to go over the copyright information, because that's important. It says right here, all rights reserved. But I did take special care to get the artist's permission to read this, the author's permission, rather, to read this. So we are going to. And we're going to read the dedication here. To Nan Schubel, with love and thanks. Now, from what I understand, this is a trilogy. And this book is still for sale, like in retailers and stuff, so you should probably check it out. Also, it is being part of a trilogy. Those books are for sale too, so make sure. Check it out. Okay, let's start out with part one, Zach. He knew they had been expecting him. When Zach rode into the dusty yard, scattering the fowl, a face almost immediately appeared in the small window at the front of the cabin, and another peeked from behind a corner. Slowly he climbed down and tethered his mount to the wooden rail, which ran along one side of the house, then stretched to get the stiffness out of his limbs. It had been a very long ride, and he was not young. The door opened, and a small man stepped out, dressed in leather trousers and a worn cotton tunic. He was followed by a woman, also wearing trousers and in the northern fashion. A dirty boy child clung to her, sucking his thumb. Yes, stranger, said the man. Marcin and Eugenia. The little man grunted assent. I am Zach, delegate of the principal. You were told to expect me. He showed his seal ring, which I guess is like a signet ring. The arrangements have been made. The little man looked at once nervous and greedy. Yes, the man relaxed and stole a glance at his wife. She looked away. Zach spoke again. The girl is ready? The man nodded. The three stood for a moment and looked directly at one another. Then the woman turned to her husband. He must be tired and hungry, she said. The little man grimaced slightly, not hiding the distaste at sharing hospitality with Zach. Clearly, there was not a question of thrift. Clearly this was not a question of thrift. It was obvious the family had barely enough for themselves, but like district people everywhere, they would be honor-bound to share with a visitor. This was not the first time Zach had been hated while in service to the principal, and it would not be the last. Come inside, Marcin. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Marcin abruptly turned and followed his wife through the door. Zach had to duck his head, and once inside found he could not stand up quite straight except to one side of the long room. It was large and bare, with fresh rushes spread over the packed dirt floor. Most of the space was overhung with a loft which dropped perhaps 20 inches from the roof. This appeared to be used by the family for sleeping, although his head cleared the bottom edge of the loft. Zach could not see anything beyond darkness and heaped bedding. A long table flanked by benches, 2 rickety stools, a loom, and a straight-backed rocking chair completed the furnishings. At the far end of the room was a large fireplace with a heavy metal cooking pot set on a rack. Sit, said Marcin, offering Zach the chair. Thank you, said Zach. He sat gingerly onto the wooden seat, which was barely large enough to hold him, while Marcin and his wife sat side by side on one of the benches. Now he noticed small pairs of eyes staring at him in curiosity and fear. He counted 5 children, with the girl. That makes 6. And from the look of the woman, a 7th was on the way. For her sake, he hoped it was not a girl. The silence was surprising. The children seemed spiritless, perhaps from malnutrition. If I may impose on your hospitality, I prefer to begin the trip back in the morning, said Zack. There are at least there are at most 2 hours of light left. Yes, of course, said Marson. That that means we have her one more night, said the woman. Be quiet, said Marson. The woman looked at him angrily, seemed about to speak, then turned to Zack. We have no bed to offer you, she said. I'm happy to have a roof over my head, said Zack. How long a journey is it to the capital? Asked the oldest boy. He had been working at the loom and looked to be about 10 years old. Not far, if you could get there directly, said Zack, but the going is slow through Bat Country. After that, it's best to follow the river south and east by foot. It would take a very long time. By mount, it took me just under 10 days, riding hard to get here. How did you find us? The principal's taxmen are preparing maps of the entire district. They have marked every town and cabin in this sector. That way they don't miss squeezing anyone, said Marson, no matter how poor. Marson, hissed the woman. Zack pretended to not hear the exchange. He didn't blame the little man. Taxes were necessary for building the district and securing it, but the burden seemed to fall most heavily on the very poor. To cover his embarrassment, Zack opened his leather pouch. Do you mind if I smoke? He asked. Please, said the woman. As Zack tamped new smoke into the pipe, the older boy came closer. His dark blue eyes were enormous as he studied Zack and his trappings. What's that? He asked, pointing to the delicate feathers which poked up from Zack's pouch. Don't bother him, Dave. I'm going to say that's pronounced Dave. It's Daiv, so I think it's pronounced Dave, said Marson. I don't mind, said Zack. He opened the pouch and pulled out a narrow instrument made of thin, polished pieces of dark red wood. Between the two end pieces were stretched 6 double strings. Their splendidly feathered ends fastened with bone pegs. This is a feathered lyre, he told the boy. The strings are made from the tail feathers of a new bird that lives in the south and can't fly. The ends of the feathers are very strong and stretchable, like hair. When I pull on a string like this, it makes a tone, he demonstrated, and the cabin was suddenly filled with the haunting moan of the feathered lyre. No one spoke as the sound slowly faded. Zack put the instrument away, then lit his pipe with a glowing piece of kindling from the fire and sat puffing, wishing that he weren't here, wishing that the principal had not asked this of him. But, of course, Zack was the only man he could trust on this mission. It was strange how two men who were so close could be so different in the most important ways. Of course, the principal had always maintained that they were more alike than Zack ever cared to admit. Zack's mind drifted with the new smoke that was gradually pulled back to the long room by the aroma of cooking food, and by the bustling of the woman as she set the table with bread, drinking gourds, and wooden bowls. Will you have brew with dinner? Asked Marston. Zack hesitated. Clearly, brew was something precious to the man, and just as clearly he did not really want to share it, but to refuse would be an insult. And besides, after the long, grueling ride, Zack craved the bitter taste and relaxing warmth. Yes, please, he said. Marston bowed her head slightly and disappeared outside. The boys squirmed themselves into a long bench which barely seated all of them. The oldest, Dave, I think that's pronounced right, was the only one who seemed able to look at Zack for more than a few seconds at a time. Marston returned with a large, stopped crock. I see. With a large stopped crock and 2 pottery tankards, and poured. To your health, said Zach, raising his tankard. Marson lifted his, but did not speak. The brew was surprisingly good, as fresh as any he had tasted in the capital. Did you make this yourself? Marston nodded. My father was a brewer. I was to follow in his footsteps, but outlaws took the town and we were burned out. There's not much market for the stuff here, or much time for brewing. You have the touch, said Zach. Perhaps someday you'll be able to put it to use. Not likely, living as we do, said Marson. Good ingredients are too rare and too expensive. For this batch I used real corn. We traded last fair day for some beets we'd grown. That's excellent, Zach repeated. He now tasted the stew, which was thin and meaty and seemed to consist largely of beets and unidentifiable greens, and what might once have been fowl. The stew is good too, he said. Thank you, mistress. We're happy to share, the woman said. Then, leaning across the table, she whispered to the oldest boy, Dave, take your bowl up to your sister. She's hardly eaten for 2 days. Zach watched as the boy disappeared up the rough ladder to the loft. I've heard the principal plans to expand trade, said Marson. That's true, said Zach. The first step is building better roads. Once they've come into this region, it's possible that you could set up a brewery and inn. Such places exist now closer to the capital. Marson grunted. You put all your work into something, try and build it up, and outlaws take it over. No, thank you. That's what the principal is trying to prevent, said Zach. The risk of outlaws going down are as more people move into the area. The principal hopes to extend civilization to all corners of the district and beyond. Civilization, muttered Marson. That's what got us into this mess we have now. Zach had no answer. Marson was about to speak again when there was a sudden piercing feminine cry of no and a thumping noise, followed by Dina's take you, Evie. There was another thump, and then Dave descended the ladder, holding the bowl, its contents soaking the front of his tunic. She doesn't want to eat, he said, and took his place again. His mother started to say something, then stopped, looking up at the loft. When she returned to her own meal, she kept her face lowered. For a moment nobody spoke, and Marson said gruffly, Pass over the serving bowl, Dave. Zach felt he could not swallow one more bite of this family's food. I'm quite full now, he said, pushing himself from the table. Thank you. Welcome, said Marson. Unceremoniously, he took Zach's half-empty bowl and poured its contents back into the serving bowl. I believe I'll take a walk, said Zach, if you'll excuse me. The man and woman didn't bother to hide their relief. We close the house when the sun goes down, said Marson. You won't want to be out then, anyways. Hanging his smoking pouch on his belt, Zach stepped outside and went to his mount, which had been lapping water from a trough at the side yard. He took a short sword from the saddle and walked towards the woods. He was too tired to do much walking, but wanted to give the brewer's family more time to sort out their troubles. He half expected that when he returned, they would announce that they had changed their minds. Of course, he could not allow that. The principal had become obsessed with the project. Zach sat on a boulder and, using his flint and steel, lit his pipe. Then he gazed beyond the roof of Marson's wretched hut. The smoke escaping through the chimney hole seemed to blend with that from Zach's pipe. Only by focusing could he keep them separate. Just as he was about to separate himself from the general misery of humankind by keeping his own wants and expectations so low that he was seldom disappointed. Whether it was his reluctance to return to the hut or the reverie inspired by new smoke, sunset crept up on him. It happened so gradually that there was no 1 minute when he could say, "This is dusk." Rather, the air changed imperceptibly. Becoming more moist and cool, the color of the sky went from blue to bluer than indigo. The trees began to vibrate with the sounds of insects, and it was only after he had been startled by the bite of a shiny green fly that Zack realized how late it was. He must get back to the cabin. His mount had already assumed the immobile position of sleep by the time Zack reached the yard. He started towards her to retrieve his blanket, when he heard the swishing of wings above him. He threw himself to the ground barely in time to avoid the poison-dripping talons of the bat, which had found him out at night unprotected. He rolled over twice to avoid another attack, then rose to a crouch, his sword out defensively. He began to back up slowly, listening for the flapping wings, but which were invisible in the near total darkness. He had nearly reached the door when the eerie swishing sound again approached, and he threw himself against the door, fell into the room, and kicked the door shut. A second later, he heard the sound of talons scraping wood, a high-pitched squeal of frustration, and then silence. Zack took a deep breath and slowly stood. His legs were trembling, and he felt foolish as the brewer's family looked at him. The children wide-eyed, Marson and his wife impassive. It gets dark quickly here, said Marson. Sit down, said the woman. Zack sank into the chair and gratefully accepted the tankard of brew she poured for him. You have no trouble with bats on the way here? She asked. I saw none. Thought I heard one once, said Zack. I heard a bat can kill you in 10 seconds, said Dave. Is that true? Quite likely, said Zack. The poison is very powerful and fast-working. I saw a bat take a sheep down in half a minute, and said Marson. It was years ago, before poison bats were as common as they are now. Enough talk of bats, said the woman. It will give us all bad dreams. Then she flushed, perhaps remembering that there was already reason for bad dreams. Dave, go on up to bed, she said. Make sure the little ones are settled and see if Evie wants anything. With a show of reluctance, Dave mounted the ladder. Hushed whispers drifted down, and Zack hoped there wouldn't be another outburst. Does the boy know what has been arranged? Asked Zack in a low voice. Only that Evie's going away to the capital, said Marson. He snorted. He wanted to know why he can't go too. The little man looked down at his feet while his wife suddenly busied herself with some mending. Zack sensed that they would prefer to settle the business tonight, but were hesitant to bring it up. He too would prefer to get it over with, but the principal had been explicit. He mustn't turn over any metal until he and the girl. So he had the girl secure. But what was the harm? They would leave at daybreak, and she couldn't go anywhere before then. Not with bats hunting. On the other hand, he hadn't seen her, only heard muffled whispers and some scraping noises. Perhaps it was all a trick. But then Zack remembered the high-pitched no and the hurt and puzzled look on Dave's face. Those could not have been faked. Nor could the pain and embarrassment of the brewer and his wife. We'll be getting a very early start tomorrow, Zack said casually. Perhaps we should settle our business tonight. That might be best, Marson agreed. Zack reached into his pouch and brought out a small cloth bag, heavy with metal. Marson's eyes followed the bag as Zack held it in his hand. You both understand that once you take this, you cannot change your minds. That you will never see the girl again. I understand, replied Marson. And you, madame? There was a long silence, and then she nodded. Her other fathers? Her first father is dead. Very well. The principal wants her citizens. Oh, excuse me. Let me reread that. I got distracted. Very well. The principal wants his citizens to know that he himself observes his laws scrupulously. A few years ago, his men could simply have taken her, whether you agreed or not. That's so. That's so, said Marson. This way, it's a fair exchange, value for value. I give you this medal, and you give your daughter to the principal, in my care, forever. We agree, said Marson. Yes, said the wife. Oh, said his wife. Only, can you tell us what is going to happen to her? She's the principal's to do with what he wishes, said Marson. And he's an honest man. He obeys his own laws. Zack reached for the brew without comment. Yes, the principal was an honest man, and in most ways a good and kind one. In this one area only he showed a dark side so strong that all of his good intentions and works seemed powerless against it. I'll take good care of her on the journey, Zack found himself telling the couple. I'll care for her as if she were my own daughter. In the capital she will be well fed and well clothed for the time that she remains with the principal, at least, he thought privately. The man and woman seemed overwhelmed, and Zack sensed that they were once again at the point of changing their minds. He spoke. Why don't we all have a bit of brew to seal the bargain? Yes, agreed Marson. He hopped up and refilled Zack's tankard and his own, and a drinking gourd for his wife as she took it. Zack could see that her hands were trembling. To our bargain, said Zack. They drank. He rose and handed the money bag to Marson, who opened it onto the floor in front of him. He and his wife counted through the shiny round coins twice. It's so much, the woman said. Value for value, said Zack. I advise you to hide it in a very safe place. Even in this remote place, it's possible I have been seen and recognized. I already know the place, said Marson. I'll attend to it as soon as you've left in the morning. I wish you luck, said Zack. Marson looked at him then. Thank you. He sounded exhausted. He gathered up the medal and replaced it in the bag, then stood and took his wife's hand. Come on then, he said. Let's go to bed. After they had climbed to the loft, Zack finished his brew. Looking at the fire, he thought of his blanket still outside on the mount. Then spread his cloak and stretched his long frame out on it, resting his head on his hands. He was so tired that he ached. But it was a long time before he fell asleep. When he did, he dreamed that he was lost in a snowbank, hands and feet turning blue. White needles of ice fell from the sky around him. Chapter 2. Zack was awakened by hands gently shaking him. He sat up quickly, startled, and recognized the face of the brewer's wife. Wake up, she said. The sun's just rising. Zack stretched and stood feeling stiff from head to toe. The fire had burnt down to ashes, and the room was cold. You can wash outdoors by the shed, said the woman. In here we keep only enough water for cooking. Zack pulled his cloak over his shoulders and went out into the yard. Shallow footprints in the lightly dewed ground showed that Marson and his wife had both been out earlier. Zack bent over a barrel filled with rainwater and splashed his face, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, then dried with the edge of his cloak. He mounted his mount was whistling softly. He gently stroked her side and brought her to the front of the cabin, in grazing range of some scrub. He stood for a moment, gazing at the surrounding woods, orange and yellow in the early morning light, then went back indoors. The woman was busy at the fire while Dave and the 4 young children stood about her, making sleepy sounds. Go and wash up, children, she said, and Dave, please see to the cut on Joseph's cheek. After a curious glance at Zack, Dave herded the younger children outside, and presently the door opened again, and Marson entered, holding a pail of water and some greens. It's bitter cold this morning, he remarked. Looks to be another early winter. He inclined his head towards Zach then. Good morning. Good morning, said Zach. We have a simple breakfast, said Marson. Porridge and root tea. His tone was fairly sarcastic. That's better than I've had in many days, said Zach. Then realizing that what might portend for Evie, he added, I've been in such a hurry I haven't taken much time for food. Marson walked over to the fire and warmed his hands, then looked into the kettle. Hurry up, Pete. Hurry that up, he said. The woman pushed stringy hair off her forehead with the back of her hand and turned and looked at him. The water is just boiling, as you can plainly see. Leave the tea to me. It's time to prepare Evie. She didn't answer. A few minutes later, she carried the pot of porridge to the table, and without another word, ascended to the loft. Will you have tea? Asked Marson, without waiting for an answer. He ladled hot water into a cup and handed it to Zach. Through the steam, Zach could see what looked like dried roots at the bottom. Marson went to the door and called out, Come in, boys, it's cold. Almost immediately, the 5 boys entered, Dave carrying the youngest. I think Joseph's sick, he said. He's hot, and he keeps rubbing the scratch on his face. Give him to me, said Marson. He took the youngster in his arms and turned the boy's cheeks to the window. He'll be all right, he announced. He set the baby down, and Zach saw that the wound was red and oozing, with angry little lines beginning to spread from it. He felt a sudden chill and turned to his tea, cupping his hands around it for warmth. It might help to clean the wound with soap and water, he said after a moment. That's old-fashioned nonsense, said Marson. Scratches heal, or they don't. Sit down, boys. Dave, give me the bowls. Zach had become aware of a low, urgent murmuring from the loft, then shuffling sounds. He heard the woman, and he presumed the girl descending. Come along, Evie, said the woman. She had her arm around a figure who was almost completely hidden by a long blue cloak. Zach looked after them, and as they went through the narrow door. We are going to stop it here. It has been about half an hour. I'm going to put a bookmark in here. I have an official bookmark, probably, or a bookmark that would work better than this, but for now, I will get it out in a little bit. Anyways, we have been reading Pandora's Genes. It is the first book in a trilogy by Kathryn Lance, who gave me permission to read the book on my YouTube channel. So, my thanks go out to her, and I'm honored to do such a thing. Anyways, all I have to say is that this book is probably still for sale at most bookstores if you want to buy it, along with the other 2 books of the trilogy, which I still have to look up what they are. But anyways, if you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.